The sound reached him at 5:47 in the morning, in the dark, on the wrong side of the ridge. Elias Pruitt had walked the same path home from Buchanan No. 6 for 11 years. Up the switchback behind the tipple, across the drainage creek, and then along the flat of Kettle Branch Road, where the trees thinned enough to see the old slag heap glowing faintly orange in the pre-dawn light. He knew every stone on that path. He knew which section of the drainage pipe hummed in a strong wind. He knew the sound of ore cars rolling on the active line 300 yards to his left, the particular clang of a cart latch catching, the way the sound carried differently in cold air than in warm. He had spent 11 years learning the acoustics of this hollow, because in a place where you worked blind and deaf 2,000 feet underground, learning to hear above ground was the closest thing a man had to safety. That morning the sound was wrong. It came from the right, not the left, not from Buchanan No. 6. From No. 4, Pruitt stopped walking. He was carrying his empty dinner pail in his left hand and his carbide lamp, unlit now, morning being enough light, in his right. The temperature was 38 degrees. He could see his breath. He stood for 8 full seconds without moving, listening with the focused attention of a man who has spent a career learning to distinguish between sounds that mean a rockfall is coming and sounds that simply mean the earth is settling. This was neither. This was mechanical. This was iron on iron. This was the unmistakable percussion of a loaded cart rolling over a track joint at speed. It lasted 4 seconds. Then it stopped. Pruitt stood for another 30 seconds. The hollow went quiet except for the creek and a crow somewhere above the spruce line. He looked toward the sealed entrance of Buchanan No. 4, or where the entrance would have been. Had the company not poured a 6-foot concrete plug across the mouth of it in September 1909 and covered it with a timber bulkhead and a consolidated mountain coal notice declaring the site permanently closed per West Virginia Bureau of Mines Order 114C. The plug was still there. He could just make out the pale gray face of it in the shadows between the tree line and the base of the ridge. Nothing moved. No light, no smoke, no sound. He told himself it was the creek. He told himself it was the settling of the old slag heap, which sometimes made noises at temperature change that sounded almost mechanical. He had heard both before. He had been wrong before about sounds in a hollow, but he had never, in 11 years, been wrong about the sound of an iron cart wheel crossing a track joint. He went home, he ate, he slept 4 hours. And when he woke up that afternoon, the first thing he thought about was not his wife's voice, or his son's cough, or the 14-cent wage reduction Consolidated Mountain Coal had announced the previous Thursday. The first thing he thought about was the sound he had heard at 5:47 in the morning, on the wrong side of the ridge. To understand what Pruitt heard, you have to understand what Buchanan No. 4 was, and what it had been before the explosion. The No. 4 shaft opened in 1901, bored straight into the southern face of Levisa Mountain by a crew of 83 men working in 3 shifts through the summer heat and into the early frost. Consolidated Mountain Coal had purchased the mineral rights to 4,200 acres of Mingo County land in 1898 for $11 per acre, a transaction that would be worth examining closely in later years, but which in 1898 attracted no particular scrutiny. The seam they were chasing ran at an average depth of 1,900 feet, slanting gently downward to the southeast, and by every test bore the company geologist conducted, it held approximately 2.1 million tons of extractable coal. It was, by the standards of southern West Virginia in 1901, an exceptional find. The mine employed, at its peak in 1907, 214 men. They were paid $1.08 per ton of clean coal loaded, from which the company deducted rent for company housing at $3.50 per month, fuel at $1.20 per month, use of company tools at 75 cents per month, and a mandatory insurance contribution of 40 cents per month to the company's own accident fund, a fund administered, it would later emerge, entirely by the company's own treasurer, with no outside oversight and no published accounting. The men were paid not in federal currency but in consolidated mountain scrip, redeemable exclusively at the company store, where a 50-pound sack of flour cost $1.85, approximately 40 cents more than it cost at any independent store in Williamson, 22 miles north. Elias Pruitt had been one of those 214 men. He started at number 4 at the age of 23 in the spring of 1902, arriving from Buchanan County, Virginia, where his father had worked a small operated-to-exhaustion coal lease until the company that owned it folded in 1900. Pruitt was not a large man. The mine records describe him in a 1905 accident report as 5 feet 7 inches, approximately 148 pounds. But he was, by every account that survives, extraordinarily strong for his size, with the compressed, efficient musculature of a man who spent 10 hours a day shoveling coal into carts in spaces too narrow to stand upright in. He could load 7.2 tons per shift on a good day. The company average was 5.4. He had no education beyond a winter term at a one-room schoolhouse in Buchanan County, where he learned to read printed text well enough and to write his name and the numbers he needed to keep track of his own production tally. Mathematics above simple arithmetic was beyond him, and he would have said so plainly if anyone had asked. But Pruitt had a gift that no schoolhouse had given him, and no schoolhouse could have taught. He remembered numbers. Not in the way an educated man recalls figures from a ledger, but in the physical, cellular way that a man who has spent 11 years counting cartloads remembers quantities. He knew how many carts he had loaded every single day of his working life. He knew the weight of each one within 50 pounds. He knew the length of track from the number 6 loading face to the tipple, 2,340 feet. He could not have told you why he knew these things. He simply did. In the winter of 1907, a crack appeared in the main shaft of number 4 at a depth of approximately 1,200 feet. The company surveyor filed a report in February of that year, noting the crack's presence and recommending an inspection of the timbering in sections 12 through 17 of the main gallery. The company's mine superintendent, a man named Garfield Odom, reviewed the report, signed the receipt copy, filed it in the company office in Williamson, and did not commission the inspection. He would later say, in a deposition that remains in the Mingo County Courthouse, largely unread, that he had been waiting for a convenient shutdown window that never materialized. Production demands were high. The Baltimore office was pushing for 1,900 tons per week. There was never a convenient window. On August 14th, 1909, at 6:22 in the morning, a methane pocket in section 14 of the number 4 main gallery ignited. The cause of ignition was never definitively established. The explosion propagated through sections 12, 13, 14, and 15 in approximately 4 seconds. Of the 61 men working the early shift that morning, 29 were killed outright by the concussion and the subsequent fire. 14 more were pulled out alive, several with severe burns. 18 managed to reach an auxiliary vent drift and waited there for 11 hours before rescuers broke through. The 29 dead were recovered over the following 6 days. They were buried in the company cemetery on the hill above the Buchanan Creek, their names recorded in the county death register, their families given a single cash payment of $75 each from the company's accident fund. The Bureau of Mines issued Closure Order 114-C on September 3, 1909. The concrete plug was poured on September 17th. The timber bulkhead went up on September 19th. Company President Alden Marsh wrote a letter of condolence to the county commissioner dated September 21st, expressing the company's deep sorrow and its firm commitment to the safe operation of its remaining facilities. The letter was printed in the Williamson Daily News on September 23rd. By September 30th, Buchanan No. 6, the adjacent operating shaft, had increased its weekly output from 1,640 tons to 1,890 tons. Nobody thought to ask why. Pruitt had survived the No. 4 explosion by accident of schedule. He had been assigned to the day shift at No. 6 for the month of August, a rotation that placed him on the wrong mountain at the wrong time, which is to say the right mountain at the right time, depending on how you counted it. He had known 19 of the 29 men who died. He had eaten lunch beside some of them the previous week. He had worked in Section 14 more times than he could reliably number, though he would have said 600 or 700, which was probably close. He attended all 29 funerals. He said nothing publicly about the inspector's report or the timbering or the $75 payments because he did not know about any of those things at the time. He simply worked. He moved to No. 6. He loaded his 7 tons per shift. He went home to his wife and his son and his 4-room company house on Kettle Branch Road and tried not to think about what it had sounded like when the mountain moved. The sound he heard on that October morning in 1912 cracked something loose in him that he would not have been able to name. For 2 weeks after that morning, Pruitt did nothing. He walked the path home at the same time in the same direction and listened. He heard nothing further on the first night or the 3rd or the 7th. On the 9th night, he stopped at the same spot and stood for 4 minutes in the dark and heard only the creak. On the 11th night, the temperature dropped to 31 degrees, and he heard it again. 2 sounds this time, separated by a gap of approximately 20 seconds, both from the right, both iron on iron. The second one slightly higher in pitch than the first. The sound Pruitt recognized immediately of a cart moving uphill rather than down. Loaded carts moved downhill to the tipple. Empty carts moved back uphill. That was the entire logic of a mine's internal transport system, a logic he had internalized over 11 years so completely that it lived in his body rather than his mind. Loaded carts moving down, empty carts moving back up. Something was being extracted from Buchanan No. 4. He stood in the dark for 11 minutes that night listening before he walked home. He did not tell his wife. He did not tell his shift foreman, a man named Curtis Blevins, who had worked for Consolidated Mountain Coal for 22 years and whom Pruitt regarded as honest but frightened. He did not tell the union steward because there was no union steward. The United Mine Workers had been driven out of Mingo County in 1907, 2 years before the explosion, and the men at Buchanan No. 6 worked under a yellow dog contract that forbade union membership as a condition of employment. He decided to look for himself. He had no plan beyond this. He simply decided to look. The sealed entrance of number 4 was visible from the path, and approaching it directly in daylight was not possible without being seen from the number 6 tipple on the ridge above. Pruitt understood this without having to reason through it. He waited for a Sunday, his one guaranteed day off, and went up the ridge from the back, through the second-growth hickory above the creek, moving in a wide arc that kept him above the sight line of anyone working at either mine. It took him 40 minutes to cover 3/4 of a mile. He was not a subtle man by nature, but he was a deliberate one, and he moved carefully. The main sealed entrance looked undisturbed. The concrete plug was intact. The timber bulkhead was weathered but solid. The Bureau of Mines notice, a printed form in black ink on yellow paper, now badly faded, was still tacked to the upper crossbeam, its edges curled. Pruitt examined the entrance for 6 minutes without touching it. He saw nothing that suggested recent use. He walked the perimeter of the sealed portal and found nothing. He walked south along the base of the ridge for 200 feet and found nothing. He turned back, frustrated, and was about to retrace his route when he noticed the depression. It was in the ground, 8 feet south of where he had turned around. A slight settling of the earth in a rectangular shape, approximately 4 feet wide and 7 feet long, covered with a growth of dead grass and leaf litter that was thinner and flatter than the surrounding ground, as if it had been laid down recently and had not yet knit back into the soil. Beside it, 2 small stones had been placed in a configuration that looked casual but was not. They were too precisely spaced to be accidental. They were markers. Pruitt did not pull up the cover that day. He did not know what was under it or who might be watching. He memorized the location, 200 feet south of the main sealed entrance, 8 feet from the ridge base, marked by 2 stones 14 inches apart, and he went home the same way he had come. He lay awake that night for 3 hours. By morning he had made 2 decisions. The first was that he was going back. The second was that when he did, he was going to bring something to write with. This is where the story becomes complicated, because Pruitt's ability to document what he found was severely limited by the tools available to him. He owned no notebook. Paper in the company town was sold at the company store at 3 cents per sheet, which was not an outrageous price, but was enough that a man who earned $1.08 per ton had to think about whether he needed it. He had a short pencil stub, the kind that came free with a mail-order catalog. He had his memory. What he also had, and this would matter enormously later, was a habit of counting. He counted everything. He had always counted everything. He counted as a physical reflex, the way another man might tap his foot or roll a coin across his knuckles. He counted the planks in the footbridge over Buchanan Creek. He counted the steps from his front door to the company store. He counted the bolts on the mine cart wheels at number 6, 8 per wheel, 4 wheels per cart, 32 bolts per cart, and he had loaded coal into approximately 23,000 of them over 11 years. He did not know he was building a skill. He did not think of it as a skill. He thought of it as simply the way his mind worked. On the second Sunday, Pruitt went back to the ridge. He pried up the cover, a hinged frame of planks laid over a rectangular cut in the hillside, disguised with a layer of dirt and sod, and found beneath it a vertical shaft approximately 3 feet square, dropping at a steep angle into darkness. The shaft had been timbered. The timbers were new. They smelled of fresh-cut yellow pine, not of the damp decay that would have characterized any original No. 4 infrastructure. This shaft had not been here in 1909. It had been cut since. He lowered himself down 4 feet, holding the edges of the frame. The shaft was deep enough that he could not see the bottom. From below, rising through the darkness, came the smell of coal dust and lamp oil, and the particular stale, mineral cold of a working mine. He pulled himself back up. He sat on the edge of the opening for a moment, heart running at a pace he did not try to count, and thought about what he was looking at. A secondary entrance, cut after the ceiling, timbered with fresh pine, smelling of active operations. He covered the shaft carefully and went home. That night, October 29th, 1912, a date he later confirmed through the county courthouse's records of his wife's prescription at the company pharmacy, one of the few dated personal documents from his life that survives. Pruitt sat at the kitchen table after his family was asleep and wrote the following on the back of a coal tallying slip he had taken from the No. 6 loading face. 200 feet south, 8 feet from rock, 3x3 shaft. New wood, pine, fresh, goes deep. He folded the piece of cardboard and placed it inside his left boot. He wore it there for the next 4 days. It was the first document he had ever created in his adult life. He was 34 years old. On the morning of November 4th, 1912, at 5:44 a.m., Pruitt stopped on the path home from his shift and listened for 14 minutes. The sounds came on the 6th minute. He counted them this time, deliberately. 1 cart, pause of 22 seconds. 2nd cart, pause of 18 seconds. 3rd cart, a longer pause, 31 seconds. 4th, 5th. He counted 29 cart sounds in the 14 minutes he stood listening. Some were downhill and loaded, some were uphill, empty. The pattern was consistent enough to be operational, not incidental, not mechanical echo, not settling ground. Someone was running a full production shift inside a sealed mine with enough carts in rotation to suggest a crew, coordination, and a loading face that was actively producing. 29 carts. He counted them again in his memory on the walk home. He had lost track of 3 of the uphill sounds partway through. So he revised his count to 26, then added back 2 he was confident of, settling on 28. He wrote 29 or 28 carts, Monday morning, count again, on a second tallying slip that evening, and put it with the first one in his boot. He did not know it yet, but he had just counted his way to the edge of something that 3 years of company management, 1 county sheriff, 2 federal inspectors, and a Baltimore holding company had spent enormous effort keeping invisible. 29 mine carts, moving in a sealed mountain, and somewhere at the bottom of that fresh-cut shaft, in an active working mine that officially ceased to exist in September of 1909, there were men. He had to find out how many. Chapter 2. What the Mountain Swallowed. The first time Pruitt tried to go down the shaft, He got within 4 feet of the opening and heard voices. He had chosen a Wednesday, the 6th of November 1912, timing his approach for the dead hour between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, when Number 6's day shift would be deep underground, and the ridge above the sealed entrance would be empty. He had taken a longer route through the hickory, adding 20 minutes to the walk, staying low on the downslope side of the tree line. He had brought his carbide lamp, his tallying pencil, 2 blank slips of cardboard, and a length of rope he had taken from the equipment shed at Number 6, telling himself he would return it before Saturday. He had rehearsed in his mind the sequence of actions he planned to take once he reached the shaft opening. He was as prepared as a man with no training, no allies, and no clear sense of what he was walking into could possibly be. He was not prepared for voices. They came from below the covered hatch, low, rhythmic, speaking in a language he did not recognize. Not English, not the German or Welsh he knew from the Number 6 crew. Something harder edged, with consonants that clustered in ways English did not allow. The voices rose briefly, then subsided. He heard beneath them the specific metallic ring of a pick striking coal, not the dull thud of rocky material, but the sharp, bright crack of a good seam yielding to a practiced blow. It was the sound he had made himself 10,000 times in the dark. He knew it the way he knew his own heartbeat. He lay flat on the ground with his chin in the dead leaves and did not move for 19 minutes. Then he got up and went back through the hickory the way he had come. He spent the next 11 days observing from a distance. He mapped the shaft cover's location as precisely as he could, using the positions of 3 surrounding trees as reference points and pacing out the measurements on 3 separate visits. He noted the times at which he heard sounds emanating from the general area of the sealed entrance. Not just the cart sounds from the path, but subtler things, now that he was listening specifically. A brief metallic clang at approximately 11 a.m. on the 9th. The sound of something being dragged across stone on the morning of the 11th, and on the 14th, unmistakably, the sound of a man coughing, the deep, wet cough of someone who had been breathing coal dust for months. He wrote all of this on the backs of tallying slips and kept them in a small tin that had previously held carbide pellets, which he stored in the gap between the interior wall and the outer sheathing of his home, behind a loose board near the kitchen stove. There were, by mid-November, 9 slips of cardboard in that tin. They constituted, in their blunt, partially misspelled notations, the most detailed record of the Buchanan No. 4 operation that anyone outside the company had yet attempted to assemble. They were written by a man who would not have described himself as capable of writing anything of consequence. He was keeping accounts, the only way he knew how, because he had spent 11 years keeping accounts of coal. On the 15th of November, he found the token. It was lying 3 feet from the base of a spruce tree, 14 feet east of the shaft cover, half covered by leaf litter, as if someone had dropped it while moving in a hurry and not noticed. Pruitt picked it up and turned it over in his hand. It was a script token, a brass disc approximately 1 inch in diameter, stamped on the front with a denomination of 50 cents and a company identifier. He had handled thousands of them over the years. The denomination was standard. The identifier was not. It did not read Consolidated Mountain Coal. It did not read Buchanan No. 6, or any designation he recognized from the company's current operations. It read, in small stamped letters around the rim, CMC Auxiliary BK4, BK4, Buchanan No. 4. The company was paying the men inside the sealed mine in scrip denominated specifically to a facility that officially did not exist. Pruitt stood at the base of that spruce tree for a long time. He was not a man given to dramatic internal monologue. His thinking tended to be concrete, sequential, and slow. But he understood, with the particular clarity that comes from holding a physical object that should not exist, exactly what he was looking at. The men working underground in the sealed shaft were being paid in currency that could not be spent anywhere a federal inspector might see it. Betae 4 scrip could not be redeemed at the No. 6 company store because the No. 6 store's ledger would show a transaction attached to a mine with no labor force. It would have to be redeemed somewhere else, a secondary store, possibly mobile, possibly run out of a company wagon or a private location, somewhere outside the normal accounting chain, somewhere the numbers could be made to disappear. He put the token in his boot, alongside his tallying slips, and went home. His second attempt to approach the shaft came 4 days later, and it ended worse than the first. He had decided on a nighttime approach, arriving after midnight when the cart sounds he heard on the path suggested the operation ran a reduced crew during the early morning hours between 1 and 4 a.m. He left his house at 12:40 a.m. on the 19th of November, telling his wife, who stirred when he rose, that he had left his lamp at the mine and needed to collect it before his shift. She did not fully believe this, but did not press him. She had learned, in 12 years of marriage, that Elias Pruitt moved toward a thing until he understood it, and that the only way to stop him was to give him a reason, better than the one he already had. She did not yet have one. She turned over and went back to sleep. Pruitt reached the ridge in 35 minutes, moving without a lamp to avoid being seen from the road. He found the shaft cover by feel, running his hands along the ground from the reference tree positions he had memorized. He lifted the cover 4 inches, enough to see that there was no light coming from directly below, and began to lower himself into the opening. He was chest deep in the shaft when a hand closed on his left wrist. He did not cry out, he froze. The hand was strong and rough, and it held him without pulling, which was the only reason he didn't fall. A voice said very quietly in English, with a strong accent he still could not place, "You go back. You go back now. Do not come again in night." The hand released him. By the time Pruitt had pulled himself out of the shaft and gotten to his feet, there was no one visible. He swept the area in every direction. Nothing. The cover was being held from below on a thin rope, and he watched it settle back into place as if pulled down by weight. He stood in the dark for 4 minutes. Then he went home and sat at the kitchen table until dawn, not sleeping, not writing anything down, simply sitting with his hands flat on the table and thinking about the fact that whoever was inside that shaft knew he existed. That changed everything. 3 days passed in which Pruitt worked his shift, spoke to no one about what he had found, and ate his meals in near silence. On the second of those days, his shift foreman Curtis Blevins pulled him aside at the end of the morning and said, without preamble, "I don't know what you're doing on the South Ridge on your days off, Elias, but I'd stop. That's my advice to you as a friend." Pruitt looked at him. "How do you know where I've been?" Blevins looked at the floor. He was a large man, gray-haired, with the permanently hunched posture of someone who had spent 3 decades in low-ceiling mines. He did not look up for a moment. When he did, his face carried the expression of a man delivering a message he had not composed and did not especially agree with. "Just stop," he said. "You've got a boy, you've got a house. Let it alone." He walked away before Pruitt could respond. Pruitt watched him go and noted 3 things simultaneously: that Blevins had not asked what he had seen or found, only that he stop; that Blevins had not threatened him in any specific or actionable way, and that Blevins had said, "You've got a boy," not "you've got a wife," which was the order most men would naturally use. The boy first. That was a specific kind of message. That was a message about what mattered most. Pruitt went home and moved the tin from behind the kitchen wall board to a location he would not describe to anyone. A location outside the company house, on ground that technically belonged to the county rather than to Consolidated Mountain Coal. Then he started planning his 3rd attempt. He went back on December 1st, 1912, at 3 in the afternoon, through freezing rain that he correctly calculated would keep anyone not required to be outside firmly indoors. He reached the shaft cover in 29 minutes and found it exactly as he had left it the last time. He lifted the cover, tied his rope to the base of the nearest spruce, a knot he checked 3 times, and lowered himself into the shaft. The shaft descended at approximately 40 degrees for the first 12 feet, then leveled slightly into a rough drift, cut directly into the mountain. The timbering was close and careful, not rough frontier work, but the braced framing of someone who knew how to prevent a narrow drift from collapsing under the weight of the roof above it. The pine was still pale, still giving off the sharp resin smell of recently cut wood. Pruitt estimated, based on the color and moisture content of the timbers, that this drift had been cut no more than 18 months ago, possibly less. He moved by feel for the first 30 feet, allowing his eyes to adjust. Then he saw a faint glow below him, the orange warmth of carbide lamps, distant enough to be indistinct but unmistakable in direction. He was underground. He was inside Buchanan No. 4. The drift connected at a depth he estimated as roughly 80 feet below the ridge surface, to a proper mine gallery, a cut wide enough that he could stand nearly upright, timbered with older wood that had gone dark gray with moisture and age. This was original No. 4 infrastructure. The explosion in August of 1909 had occurred in sections 12 through 15, all of which lay according to the mine's original layout that Pruitt had memorized over years of working there, to the northeast of where he now stood. He was in the southern gallery, section 18 or 19 he estimated, which had not been touched by the blast. The coal seam slanted slightly downward to the south. Section 18 had always been one of the richer veins on the property. The company had known this. The company had known this before the sealing. He moved along the gallery wall, keeping to the shadows, and the light grew stronger. After approximately 200 feet of careful movement, the gallery opened into a wider chamber, a working face freshly cut, with a vein of coal exposed across roughly 30 linear feet of wall. 4 men were working the face with picks. 3 more were shoveling the cut coal into carts positioned on a track that ran back along the gallery floor toward the northeast. 2 more men worked the track itself, setting the cart brakes, guiding the loads. Pruitt could see further down the track a junction where additional galleries branched off, each showing the glow of lamps. He could hear from those branches the sounds he had been counting from the path above. The iron percussion of carts in motion, the brief metallic ring of a brake catch, the sound of men working in practiced near silence. He counted 12 men in what he could see. There were certainly more in the galleries he could not. None of them looked up. None of them spoke. They worked with the focused, rhythmic efficiency of men who had been doing this long enough to do it without conversation, which was a very specific kind of long time. These were not men new to this operation. These were men who had been underground in this specific mine for months, possibly much longer. The carts were numbered. He noticed this on his fourth, careful scan of the working face, a detail he had initially missed, because the numbers were small and the light was dim. Stamped into the iron of the cart's side panel rather than painted on. The carts at number 6 were marked this way too, as were the carts at most organized operations, for maintenance tracking. He squinted at the nearest cart and made out the stamp, BC-6/041, a number 6 cart, a legitimate number 6 serial number. He checked the next one, BC-6/088, also a number 6 cart. Then he saw the one at the far end of the loading face, positioned at the head of the outgoing track, already loaded and awaiting the next man to take the brake off. It was slightly different in shape from the others. Older, with a slightly higher side panel and a wider axle spacing. The design that had been in use at number 4 before Consolidated Mountain Coal had standardized its cart specifications across all properties in 1910. The stamp on its side panel read BC-4/017, a Buchanan No. 4 cart, serial number 17, from a mine that, according to every official document in existence, had ceased operations on August 14, 1909, and been permanently sealed 34 days later. Cart number 17 was loaded with coal. Cart number 17 was about to be pushed down a track toward a tipple that did not officially exist. And somewhere above that tipple, at the end of a chain of transactions Pruitt could not yet trace, cart number 17's coal would be weighed, recorded, and shipped, presumably under Buchanan No. 6's manifest, folded into the production increase that had begun. Pruitt now remembered precisely, in the last week of September 1909. He had been loading coal into number 6 carts beside number 4 coal for 3 years. He had been counted as part of a production surge that was not a surge at all, but a merger. 2 operations running as one of them invisible. He had carried it on his own tonnage sheets without knowing it. The enormity of this took him approximately 4 seconds to absorb. He was a practical man. He put it away and focused on the cart. He needed to get out before anyone moved toward his position. He had made it 90 feet back along the gallery wall, moving in the direction of the secondary drift and the rope above, when the lamp found him. It was a single carbide lamp, held high, throwing a wide cone of yellow light down the gallery from behind him. Someone had come from one of the branch galleries, not from the working face, and was now standing approximately 40 feet away, facing in his direction. Pruitt pressed himself flat against the gallery wall and held his breath. The timbering created a slight recess at irregular intervals, and he was standing at one of them. He was not fully concealed. He was close. The man with the lamp was short, heavily built, wearing the standard canvas jacket of a mine worker. He stood without moving for a count of 7 seconds. Then he spoke. not in the language Pruitt had heard before, but in English, quietly, in the direction of the working face rather than toward Pruitt's position. "Anyone come through back section?" A voice from the face responded, too low to make out the words. The man with the lamp stood for another 3 seconds. He turned slightly, and for one moment the lamp's cone swept across the gallery wall, 12 feet from where Pruitt was standing. Pruitt saw the man's face clearly. Square jaw, a scar across the left cheekbone, dark eyes moving carefully along the wall. Pruitt recognized him. Not from number 6, not from number 4. From a different context entirely, one that he turned over in his mind as he pressed against the cold stone and waited, controlling his breathing by a conscious effort he had never had to apply before. He knew that face from the company office in Williamson. He had seen it twice in the past year, both times in the company of the mine superintendent, Garfield Odom, standing in the way that men stand when they are not employees but supervisors, not working but watching. The man with the lamp was not a miner. He was management. The lamp swung back toward the working face. Pruitt did not wait. He moved for the drift entrance at a pace as controlled and quiet as he could sustain, which was not fully quiet, but was quiet enough. He reached the rope, climbed it hand over hand in the dark, emerged from the shaft 20 seconds later into freezing rain and gray afternoon light, lowered the cover, and untied the rope from the spruce. He was 200 feet down the ridge, moving into the hickory before his legs began to shake. He reached Kettle Branch Road at 4:17 in the afternoon. He stood at the edge of the road for a moment in the rain, looking at his house. The smoke from the kitchen stove was going straight up in the still wet air. His son's coat was on the porch railing. He had seen 12 men working a sealed mine. He had found a cart that should not exist. He had identified a company manager running an illegal operation from inside a federal closure. He had inside that tin, behind the stone wall at the property boundary, 9 slips of cardboard that documented in his own abbreviated hand 6 weeks of observation. And someone in that mine knew his face. He knew, standing in the rain on Kettle Branch Road on the 1st of December 1912, that he had perhaps 48 hours before whatever came next came to find him. He did not know yet what that would look like. He did not know if it would be a conversation, a termination notice slipped under his door, something done to his house, or something done to him. He had no means of reaching anyone outside the county quickly. The nearest Bureau of Mines field office was in Charleston, 112 miles north. He had no money for a train ticket. He had no telephone. He had no one. Not a union man, not a lawyer, not a reporter, whose name he knew and whose willingness to listen he could rely on. He had 9 cardboard slips, a brass script token, and the cart number 17. Inside the house, his son coughed. The same deep, wet cough he had been developing since October. The cough Pruitt had been meaning to take him to the company doctor about. The company doctor? On the company payroll? Whose office was in the company building in Williamson, 40 feet from the room where Garfield Odom kept the tonnage manifests. Pruitt picked up his son's coat from the railing and went inside. Chapter 3. The weight of what was found. He gave himself one day. Not because 24 hours was enough time. It was not. But because he had worked long enough inside a company system to understand exactly how quickly a problem like him could be resolved. And the speed was not measured in days, but in the time it took one man to walk from the mine office to the company telephone and speak to someone in Williamson, Pruitt had perhaps seen that man in the gallery. The man with the lamp had perhaps already made that walk, which meant that the 1st of December 1912 was the last day on which Elias Pruitt's freedom of movement could be taken for granted, and he intended to use it. He told his wife he needed the wagon for an errand. He did not tell her what the errand was. He retrieved his tin from behind the stone wall, put it in his coat pocket, and drove the 11 miles to Williamson in a little over 2 hours on a road that had not been properly graded since October. His first stop was the Mingo County Sheriff's Office. The sheriff of Mingo County in December of 1912 was a man named Holt Dempsey, who had held the office since 1906 and would hold it until 1918, when he was appointed to an administrative position inside the State Tax Commission, an appointment that originated, as a later investigation would establish, from a recommendation letter written by Alden Marsh, president of Consolidated Mountain Coal. At the time, Pruitt knew none of this. What he knew was that Dempsey was the law, and what he had found was a violation of a federal closure order, and a federal closure order was the kind of thing a county sheriff could act on. He waited 25 minutes in the outer office. He was seen for 8 minutes. He laid out what he had found as plainly as he could: the shaft, the carts, the BK4 script token, the man from the company office he had recognized in the gallery. He placed the token on Dempsey's desk. Dempsey picked it up, turned it over twice, and set it back down. He looked at Pruitt for a moment with the careful, unhurried expression of a man conducting a private calculation behind a public face. Then he said, "That's a serious allegation against a serious company, Elias. You sure you want to be sitting here telling me this?" Pruitt said he was sure. Dempsey said he would look into it. He said it in the way a man says he will look into something when he has already decided he will not. He stood up, which ended the meeting. Pruitt picked up his token and left. He was back on the road to Kettle Branch before noon. Dempsey was on the telephone to the Consolidated Mountain Coal District office in Williamson by 12:40 p.m. This would be established 3 years later in a federal proceeding through telephone exchange records subpoenaed from the Cumberland Telephone Company. The call lasted 11 minutes. He cooked supper that evening and put his son to bed at 7:30. At 8:15, someone knocked on the back door of the house. It was one of the men from inside the mine. Pruitt recognized him immediately. The same broad build, the same canvas jacket, but without the lamp. His face visible now in the light from the kitchen doorway. He was perhaps 40 years old, with the gray pallid skin of someone who had been working underground without adequate sunlight for a long time, and dark, watchful eyes that moved quickly over Pruitt's face and then past him into the house. When he was satisfied there was no one else near the door, he spoke. His English was careful and accented and had the quality of something learned from a phrase book rather than conversation. "My name is Vasil," he said. "I am the one who holds your arm. I come to tell you what is inside because now they know you went in and now it will change." Pruitt stepped back from the door. Vasil came in. He stood in the kitchen and did not sit, and he talked for 47 minutes. What Vasil told him, piece by piece, in that kitchen, with Pruitt's wife sitting silent in the doorway to the next room, and Pruitt himself asking occasional questions in the quiet way he asked everything. was this: there were 14 men currently working in the sealed section of Buchanan No. 4. Not 12, 14. The other two worked a different part of the gallery during the hours when the main face was active, cutting a secondary vein that had been reached through a connecting drift bored in the summer of 1911. All 14 had come to Mingo County between 1910 and 1911, recruited through a labor broker in Pittsburgh, who worked with Consolidated Mountain Coal to identify men, primarily Ukrainian and Slovak immigrants, newly arrived and with no English and no established connections, who needed work badly enough not to ask specific questions about the terms. They had been brought to the Buchanan operation and taken directly to the secondary shaft entrance in the dark in a company wagon and shown the setup on their first night. They were paid 60 cents per ton in BK4 scrip, redeemable at a company-run commissary wagon that came to a meeting point on the South Road every Friday evening. The rate was 44 cents per ton, less than what No. 6 men earned. They worked 10-hour shifts, 6 days per week. They had not been above ground in daylight on a weekday since arriving. 3 of them had tried to leave. The first man, Vassal did not give a name, had walked out during the summer of 1911 and made it as far as the company road before being turned back by 2 men Vassal described as company riders, a term Pruitt understood to mean the private enforcement guard that Consolidated Mountain Coal maintained, nominally as a property security measure, in which the Bureau of Mines had no jurisdiction over. The man was returned to the mine. He was still there. The second man had tried to reach the county road in the winter of 1912 and had fallen in Buchanan Creek in the dark, in temperatures that had been below 20 degrees for 3 consecutive days. His body was recovered by the company riders the following morning. He was not reported to the county coroner. He was buried, Vassal said, in the slope waste pile on the south side of the ridge, 30 feet from the tree line, under 4 feet of mine refuse. He had been 26 years old. His name was Mikhailo Kovalenko. He had come from a village outside Lviv. The third man had simply stopped working one day in March of 1912 and sat down at the loading face and refused to move. After 2 hours, the management man, the one Pruitt had seen with the lamp, came into the gallery and spoke to him quietly for several minutes. The man got up and went back to work. Vassal did not know what had been said to him. Pruitt's wife had come fully into the kitchen by this point and sat at the table. She did not speak. She looked at Vasil with the expression of someone absorbing something that will not stop being true, regardless of how long you look at it. Vassal said that the coal extracted from the sealed section was being loaded at the connection point between the secondary drift and the main No. 6 gallery, a connection bored in early 1910, disguised behind a timbered false wall at the No. 6 end, directly into the No. 6 production stream. It was weighed at the No. 6 tipple and entered on the No. 6 manifest as regular production. The 29 carts Pruitt had counted from the path were not all from the sealed section. Some were legitimate No. 6 carts, but a consistent additional volume, which Vassal estimated at 17 to 20 carts per shift, moved from the No. 4 working faces through the connecting gallery and out under the No. 6 label every day the mine operated. The production surge at No. 6 that had begun in late September 1909, the one that had made Consolidated Mountain Coal's Baltimore investors very satisfied with the Mingo County operation, had never been a surge at all. It had been a merger. The sealed mine had never stopped producing. It had simply stopped being visible. "They will not let this stay open now," Vossel said. He meant the operation. He meant the concealment. "They will close the inside section fully and move us somewhere, or they will close us another way, but I think you already knew this." Pruitt said he had thought about it. Vossel told him about the cart. He confirmed what Pruitt had read from the stamp, BC-4/017, and added something Pruitt had not known. Cart number 17 appeared on the number 4 equipment manifest dated August 12, 1909, 2 days before the explosion, as one of 34 carts assigned to the active working sections. After the explosion, the company had submitted an equipment loss inventory to the Bureau of Mines as part of the closure documentation. Cart 17 appeared on that inventory as destroyed, Section 14 fire damage. It had been reported destroyed. It had never been destroyed. It was still rolling every day in a sealed mine, carrying coal that did not officially exist. Vossel stood up. He pulled his jacket closed. "I tell you this because Mikhailo had no one here, no family. He came alone." He paused. "Do not go to the sheriff again." He went out the back door. Pruitt never saw him again. He went to the newspaper on the morning of December 3rd. The Williamson Daily News occupied a 2-story building on Alderson Street, and its editor, a man named Clifton Gregg, had been publishing in Mingo County for 19 years. He was not a timid man by temperament, but he was a practical one. And the Williamson Daily News carried on average 4 display advertisements per issue from Consolidated Mountain Coal. Announcements, safety certifications, occasional notices of employment, which together represented approximately 12% of the paper's annual advertising revenue. Pruitt did not know this. He sat across from Gregg and laid out what he had found, including the token and the cardboard slips, for 20 minutes. Gregg listened carefully. He asked 3 questions, all of them procedural, about verification and sources, and then leaned back in his chair and folded his hands on his desk. He said, "I'd need more than this. I'd need a name I could print and a document I could photograph." Pruitt asked what kind of document. "Something from inside the company, a manifest, an order, something signed." Pruitt did not have that. He asked if Gregg would wait while he tried to get it. Gregg said he would wait. He said it in the same register as Sheriff Dempsey had said he would look into it. Pruitt picked up his evidence and left. He did not go back to Gregg. The Williamson Daily News published nothing about Buchanan No. 4 in December of 1912 or in any subsequent month of that year. The break came from a direction Pruitt had not anticipated, through an event he had no role in engineering. On December 9th, 1912, 8 days after Pruitt had gone down the shaft, a traveling Bureau of Mine Safety inspector named Raymond Fell arrived in Williamson on a routine quarterly circuit of Mingo County's operating mines. Fell was 31 years old, based in Charleston, and had been in his position for less than 2 years. He was not politically seasoned. He had no established relationship with Consolidated Mountain Coal's management. He was, in the language of the company's own internal correspondence that would surface 3 years later during federal proceedings, described as the new man from Charleston, not yet known to us. Fell arrived on a Tuesday. He presented his credentials at the No. 6 office and requested the standard access for a quarterly inspection, tonnage manifests for the previous 90 days, equipment registers, injury logs, and walking access to the active workings. The manifests were provided promptly. Fell began reviewing them that evening in his room at the Williamson Hotel. Pruitt had not known Fell was in town. He found out through a man in his boarding house who had seen the bureau credentials. He was at the Williamson Hotel by 7 p.m. that same evening and knocked on Fell's door. He was inside for 2 hours and 40 minutes. He brought everything. The tin with the 9 cardboard slips, the BK4 script token, the measurements he had memorized from the shaft and the gallery, the count of 29 cart sounds over 14 minutes on the morning of November 4th, the identification of cart BC-4/017, Vazel's account of the connecting gallery and the secondary tipple, and the 17 to 20 additional carts per shift entering the number 6 production stream. He recited it in the order it had happened, without embellishment, without urgency, in the flat, precise way that he recounted things. The same way he would have told a foreman about a crack in a roof timber. Just the measurements, just the numbers, just the sequence. Fell listened to all of it. He examined the script token for several minutes. He read each of the cardboard slips, reading them aloud when the handwriting required it, which was often. When Pruitt was done, Fell sat quietly for a moment and then asked one question. "Can you show me where the shaft entrance is?" Pruitt said he could. They went the following morning, December 10th, before dawn. Fell had telegraphed Charleston the previous night and reached the district supervisor, who authorized an emergency unannounced inspection under Section 12 of the Bureau of Mines Act of 1910. He brought with him a deputy bureau inspector who had driven from Welch overnight, a county deputy who was not Dempsey's man, but reported to the state circuit, a distinction that would prove significant, and a stenographer named Aldrich, who wrote everything down in a notebook that still exists, held in the West Virginia State Archives in Charleston, cataloged under case file 1913-BM-044. They reached the shaft cover at 6:40 a.m. Fell lifted it himself, dropped a lit lamp down to measure the depth, and confirmed the fresh pine timbering visually without descending. He then led the group around to the main sealed entrance of number 4, where he had the county deputy physically break the timber bulkhead seal, the first time the seal had been officially breached since September 1909, and entered through the main portal with 2 lamps and the full party, minus the stenographer, who remained above. They were inside for 4 hours and 22 minutes. What they found was documented in case file 1913-BM-044 across 34 handwritten pages. The connecting gallery was located and measured, 380 feet in length, bored with professional precision, timbered with 44 fresh pine sets. The working faces in sections 18, 19, and 22 showed active extraction across approximately 60 linear feet of exposed seam. The track system was intact and operational. 2,100 feet of iron rail in the sealed section connecting to the number 6 main haulage way at a concealed junction behind, as Vassal had described, a false timbered wall. When Fell's team removed the false wall, they found 11 loaded carts on the sealed side track, waiting for the next shift to move them through. One of them was cart BC-4/017. Of the 14 workers, 9 were present in the mine when the inspection team entered. They emerged from the working faces one by one as the inspection lamps moved through the gallery, blinking in the stronger light, saying nothing. They were taken above ground and held, not in custody. Fell had no arrest authority, but in the care of the state circuit deputy, while the documentation was completed. Vassal was not among the 9. Neither was the man Pruitt had seen with the lamp. Both were gone. The remaining 5 men were located over the subsequent 72 hours, most of them in the boarding houses on the South Road. Not all of them. The slope waste pile south of the ridge was located from Vassal's description, relayed by Pruitt to Fell the previous evening. It was excavated on December 14th. Mikhailo Kovalenko was found at a depth of 52 inches, wrapped in a piece of canvas that had been stenciled on one corner with the Consolidated Mountain Coal Equipment mark. He had been there since February of 1912. He was 26 years old. He had no documented next of kin in Mingo County. His name was recorded in case file 1913-BM-044 and in the Mingo County Death Register, where his cause of death was listed with bureaucratic plainness as exposure undetermined circumstances. His name appeared in no newspaper. Garfield Odom, the mine superintendent who had filed the false equipment destruction inventory in 1909 and who had, according to the case file's findings, personally directed the secondary shaft construction and the labor brokering arrangement, was indicted by a federal grand jury in March of 1913 on 3 counts: filing a false federal closure certification, conspiracy to violate the Bureau of Mines Act, and falsification of commerce records. He was convicted on the 3rd count only. The first 2 charges were dismissed at trial on procedural grounds related to the jurisdiction of the federal closure order, a technical argument made by Consolidated Mountain Coal's attorneys, a firm based in Baltimore, 7 of whose partners held shares in the company's parent holding group. Odom was sentenced to 14 months. He served 9, was released in January of 1914, and died of a heart condition in 1931 in Huntington, West Virginia, where he had been working as a coal company regional advisor since 1916. Alden Marsh, the company president, was never charged. A federal investigator's summary from April 1913, also held in the state archives, notes that the direction of the concealed operation appears to originate at the district management level, and there is insufficient evidence at present to establish direct knowledge at the executive level. Marsh sent a letter to the Bureau of Mines dated May 1913, expressing the company's cooperation with the investigation and its commitment to full compliance going forward. He retired in 1919 with a reported personal estate of $1.4 million. Consolidated Mountain Coal paid a civil penalty of $3,200, approximately 11 days of the concealed operation's estimated coal revenue at 1912 market prices. The 9 men recovered from the mine were interviewed by federal investigators through an interpreter and released. The Bureau of Mines had no mechanism for charging them with anything, as they had committed no violation and no mechanism for assisting them in any practical way, as that was not within its mandate. Their names appear in the case file and nowhere else in the public record. What happened to most of them after December 1912 is not known. Vassal was never located. The man with the lamp was never identified. Elias Pruitt was terminated by Consolidated Mountain Coal on December 12, 1912, 2 days after the federal inspection. The termination notice, which was delivered to his house by a company rider and which Pruitt's wife kept for the rest of her life, cited reduction in workforce requirements. He found work at an independent loading operation in McDowell County the following spring, driving 22 miles each way on a wagon road that worsened every winter. He never returned to Mingo County professionally. He died in 1941 at the age of 62 of pulmonary fibrosis, the coal dust in his lungs having accumulated at 7 tons per shift over 11 years, at a rate he could have calculated precisely, to a quantity that left no room for argument. His obituary in the McDowell County paper described him as a longtime coal worker. His cardboard slips, his tin, and his BK4 script token were kept by his wife in a cedar box under the bed. The tin passed to his son after her death in 1953. His son did not know what the slips meant in detail, only that his father had said they mattered, and so he kept them. He kept them in the same cedar box in a house in Welch until his own death in 1979, at which point the box was placed in a lot of personal effects, auctioned from the estate for $4. The buyer was a woman named Frances Alderman, who was not a historian and did not know what she had purchased. She was buying the box. She kept it in a closet for 6 years. In 1985, cleaning out the closet in preparation for a move, she opened the box and read the slips, or tried to, and brought them to the Special Collections librarian at the Mingo County Public Library, a man named Gerald Tice, who had been cataloging local labor history documents for 11 years, and who recognized, within approximately 3 minutes, the reference to BK4 and its significance. Tice spent the next 4 months cross-referencing the slips against case file 1913-BM-044, which he located in Charleston, and against the Mingo County Death Register and the tonnage manifests from the number. 6 operation, which had been archived with the mine company's dissolution records in 1941. His findings were published in the West Virginia History Journal in 1986 in an article of 34 pages. The article was read by approximately 300 people. It has never been cited in a mainstream publication. Elias Pruitt's name does not appear in any general history of the West Virginia coal industry. What survives is the case file. What survives is the article. What survives, in the Special Collections Room of the Mingo County Public Library, is the cedar box, with 9 cardboard slips inside, covered in pencil marks, recording measurements and counts and cart numbers noted by a man who was barely literate and who spent 6 weeks walking a path in the dark and listening to a mountain that everyone else had agreed was empty. 29 carts, 1 coal loader, 3 years of coal extracted from a sealed mine before a traveling inspector who had been on the job for less than 2 years happened to arrive on the right week and knock on the right hotel door. Nobody recorded Elias Pruitt's name for 73 years. The cart is gone. The mine collapsed in 1927 during a controlled demolition of the ridge for a road extension project. But the script token, BK4 50 cents, stamped in brass that was intended to circulate in a place that didn't exist, sits in a plastic archival envelope in a file box in Mingo County. You can request to see it. The collection is open to the public. Not many people do.